What's up guys, it's Z here, welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of the Day. Today we're profiling Shinobirds, and you might be wondering right now, why this deck right now, what has changed about the deck. So, in the recent ban list, we got back one of the most, if not the most infamous card in Yu-Gi-Oh! History, and that is Yata-Garasu. So you can expect a lot of players have tried to make the card work in some way or another, and it's very clear that the card is nothing like it used to be. The card is not going to be the terror that it once was, that it was just the most annoying card to deal with. But it's pretty fun to try to at least make something out of a card like this just because of how unique it is and how annoying it can be, especially when you pull the Yata-lock off. So there are some versions of the deck out there, but I feel like the one that's been most consistent is the one that is basically its own archetype. So Yata-Garasu is a spirit monster, and Shinobirds are the most relevant support that spirits have pretty much received ever since their release. So I feel like this deck is the one that can support any type of spirit monster that you want the most consistently, while also being able to not rely just on that card, but also get some wins with its own strategy. So this is an interesting, like, not even roguish, it's a like tier 3, tier 4 deck that you can have some fun with and try to Yata-lock people and see their expressions, especially newer players that have never seen the Yata-lock before. They would just be completely amazed of how broken in theory this combo is, but in actuality it isn't. So before we begin with the video, if you enjoyed, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. So let's start with the Shinobird monsters. First, we have 3 copies of Shinobaron Peacock. This is the main card of the deck. This is the one that upon ritual summon, it bounces 3 monsters to your opponent's hand from their field, and then you can special summon a level 4 lower spirit monster from your hand, ignoring its summon condition. And during the end phase, if this card was special summoned, you can return to the hand, and then you get 2 tokens with 1500 attack and 1500 defense. So these ritual monsters, not only can they clear your opponent's board, but they also can special summon spirit monsters from your hand, and usually spirit monsters cannot be special summoned. That's everything that all the spirit monsters say. They can only be normal summoned and they cannot be special summoned, but because these cards ignore the summoning conditions, you can actually do that. This card summons from the hand, so it's not something that will get you to a huge plus when you summon it, but the thing is, it's more generic than the other ritual monster because it bounces monsters, and even though it doesn't summon from the deck, unlike the other ritual monster, it's still the best one, and this is why we run it at 3. We play 2 copies of Shinobaron as Peacock. Now, this is the card that can special summon from the deck, ignoring summoning conditions, any spirit monster you want, but she's the one that bounces back row instead of monsters, so there will be some matchups where her effect will not be relevant at all, but some other matchups is going to be much better than Baron, and also being able to summon from the deck means that with her, not only can you try to pull off the Yata-lock if you're in a grind game and your opponent has nothing in their hand, and you know that the cards that you bounced are going to be the last cards that your opponent is ever going to use, or you can also summon a Mono Iwata from the deck, which is another great spirit support that spirits have received, which is basically a full lock, because spirits, they return to the end phase during the hand only if you have normal summon or flip summon them. If you special summon them with any way that ignores the summoning condition, they're going to stay on the field, and we all know that if a Mono Iwata stays on the field, it's basically not even a skill drain, it's a much more powerful card than that. Basically, your opponent cannot activate any monster effects from anywhere. So yeah, these 2 ritual monsters are the main win condition of the deck. This is a blind second deck because it cannot do much going first. It doesn't have any ways of getting those monsters on the field unless your opponent has cards on the field for you to bounce. So yeah, this is a blind second deck and can do it fairly consistently in my opinion. Now let's get to more generic cards. Because we're playing a ritual deck, you know that we're playing triple copies of Diviner of the Heralds. This card is amazing, and going second is even better because when you're going first, what you're doing is you're sending Herald of the Arclight to get a search. But when you're going second, if you already have a way to get to your ritual cards, which with pre-preparation of rites is not difficult at all with this deck, because pre-prep is a card that this ritual deck can play because the spell card mentions both the monster's name specifically. So going second with Diviner, you can also send Elder Entity NTSS to basically destroy a card or bait and negate, and then go for your plays. So this is why Diviner is a much better card going second than going first when you can afford to go for a going second ritual type of deck. We play 3 copies of Mono Iwata. Now, not only is this card a good card to special summon with Baroness, or with Baron if you have already drawn it to basically lock your opponent, but going second, this is a card that you can summon, and basically means that your opponent, unless they're playing a spell or a trap-based deck, they will not be able to respond to any of your cards. So for example, this card plus a Kaiju Slumber or this card plus a Baron can clear boards. So on top of having 3 Diviners, this card can also be considered one of the normal summons. But the cool thing about this card is that sometimes you can get it out without having it to return during the end phase with ritual monsters, and then you're basically going to lock your opponent completely out of the duel unless they can normal summon a monster that has more than 1900 attack points to run this over, and if they can't, you know that they won't be able to do anything unless they're playing a deck like Eldritch or Sky Striker. Now here comes the spice. We have the one copy of Yata-Garasu. Now, there are other strategies you can try with Yata-Garasu. If you want to replicate something more similar to what it used to be, maybe an Orlera strategy would be more fitting, but I don't feel like it's consistent enough to the point of being able to use this card to its fullest potential. And the thing is, you don't really have to use this card only when your opponent has absolutely nothing. Even if your opponent does have a hand, if you just keep poking them with this every turn, they're never going to draw a new card. So as long as you get rid of the cards that they have in their hand eventually, then that means that you're going to win the duel because they're never going to see a new hand. So this is why this card is so powerful and it's so notorious in the Yu-Gi-Oh community, just because of the sheer oppressiveness that your opponent was just not able to play, and either they scooped or you just poked them for 2k, for 200 every single turn, which nobody was going to sit through that more than once when they knew exactly what was going to happen. But in this day and age, a lot of the players do not really know, or they know what this card does, but they haven't really experienced it because all the players that used to play back in the day, most of them do not play anymore. So this is why you're going to catch a lot of people off guard with this card, and the reactions are going to be priceless because it's one of the most infamous and one of the most funny things you can do in the game. And if it's not consistent, it's not something to worry about, because back in the day with cards like Chaos Emperor, Sangan, Witch of the Black Forest, all without their erratas that they have right now, they were just so broken together with this card. But now it's more of like a gimmick that you can try at your locals or maybe in a fun duel to basically steal a game. So yeah, I feel like this is the perfect deck for the deck, but there are other strategies you can try as well. Now, we do play some Impantations because this deck does lack consistency. The problem with this deck is that it has only one line of ritual play. It's not like Necros, where you have so many ritual monsters, or it's not like Drytron, where you have a lot of main deck monsters that get you to any ritual monster or any ritual spell you need. So the Impantations are basically the copium versions of Drytrons, but there are some decks like this one where they help more than in other decks. So we have 2 copies of Talismandra. This is the card that you have to reveal a ritual monster to special summon it along with another monster from the deck, and when this card is summoned from the deck, it searches a ritual monster. We have 2 copies of Candle. This reveals a ritual spell to summon itself and another from the deck, and if this card is summoned from the deck, it searches a ritual spell. And we have 2 copies of Pensiplume. You reveal a ritual monster to summon this card, and this recycles ritual monsters from the graveyard if summoned from the deck. So these 6, I feel like, have become pretty standard in any list that play Incantations, just because of the ones that you want to see in your hand sometimes, but then you want to see other cards in your hand other times. So playing 3 of any can sometimes be cloggy. So I feel like 2 of each, having the ability to search both monsters and spells, and also recycle monsters during the late game with Pensiplume, is the most consistent version when it comes to this engine. We also play 2 copies of Chalice Slime. Now, the reason this card is here, it's mainly because we need to have a preparation of Rights target. Pre-prep is a really good card in the deck, but the problem is that both Shinobird monsters are level 8, so you cannot really search them with preparation just because it searches level 7 or lower, but you can search this card, and this card you can discard any card from your hand to special summon an Incantation from the deck, so it gets you the one you need. So if you're missing a ritual spell, you can get Candle. If you're missing a ritual monster, you can get Talismandra. So this card, basically, you play 5 copies of it because of preparation, and it gives you a really good target for one of the most broken ritual cards that has ever been printed. Now, I mentioned again that this is a blind second deck, so we are playing some going second cards, and I feel like the best engine to supplement a deck like this are Kaijus, mainly because you can shuffle them back to the hand. So if you Kaiju one of your opponent's monsters, and then you Baron them, and you get your Kaiju back, you can Kaiju another monster during the late game. So this is why these cards have a lot of synergy, and also I'm playing the level 8 Kaijus, so we can go into rank 8 monsters with original monsters. So we play 2 copies of Gameciel. Gameciel is the lowest attack points one, so this is why I play 2 copies of that. We play 1 copy of Gadarla. This can also help against other decks as well, but the thing is, against Barrier Statue, this is why people played, but this deck does not lose to Barrier Statue, just because the Shinobird ritual monsters are all wind attributes, so you don't really care about that. So if you're playing against Flunder, then you basically have a free pass against one of their win conditions. So yeah, but this card has been seen playing just because of the Barrier Statue, but here we played because it's level 8, and we play 1 copy of Dogran just to have 3 different names in the deck. We want 3 different names to make sure that Slumber is always live, and this is why we play all the level 8s that we can have, so we can go into rank 8s. Now let's go to the spell cards. We have 3 copies of Shinobird Calling. This is the ritual spell of the deck, and what this card does is that it acts as a normal ritual spell that you need to tribute monsters that exceed or are equal to the level of the monster you're summoning, but you can also banish spirit monster from your graveyard. So when you have one of the ritual monsters in the graveyard, basically means that the others are going to be free for the remainder of the duel, just because you can always banish a level 8 spirit ritual monster from the grave to summon another one from your hand. So it's not like this card is a normal ritual spell that is too neck to play in current metagame. It's a card that can basically give you a free monster by just banishing a monster from the grave, so you can basically use it for free. And even if you haven't ritual summoned one during the previous turns of the duel, you can always discard one with your talisman, with your Chalice Slime. To get a Talisman, search the other one, and then you can summon that by banishing the one you pitched with your Chalice Slime. We play 3 copies of Pre-Preparation of Rites. This is arguably the most broken card in the deck. In any deck that can play this card, it's really, really good. There are some ritual decks right now that this card unfortunately cannot see play, decks like Drytron or decks like Necros. This card was never going to see play in those decks just because the ritual spells are generic and they don't really specify any name of any ritual monster in their text. But here, Baron Peacock and Baroness Peacock are on Shinobird's Calling name and text, so you basically can search them with your Shinobird Calling with this card. And it's the freest +1 ever. We play 3 copy of Preparation of Rites. This is why we play Chalice Slime in the deck, because if you don't play Chalice Slime, this card is useless in Shinobird because the ritual monsters are all level 8, so you cannot search anything with that, and this is why Chalice Slime is a great card. We play 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance. You can replace this with Prosperity, but in this particular deck, in any type of weaker deck, in reality, you need the +1. Prosperity is for decks that basically you know that you can go for a certain light of play if you sing a certain card, but when you're playing weaker decks, the +1 I feel like is more important, so this is why we play Extravagance over Prosperity in this deck. We play 3 copies of Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. This card, when you combine this with Amano Iwato, it's completely devastating. You can basically normal summon Iwato, your opponent is not going to be able to activate any of their monster effects, and then you're going to slumber and basically clear the field, and then you can go for Ritual Summon. So this card is basically the good old Amano Iwato Raigeki combo. It's basically the same. And the last card is 1 copy of Call by the Grave, just because of how broken the card is. Now for the extra deck, we have basically 5 monsters all playing at 3 copies of each, just because we have Extravagance. So the ones that you're going to see the most are, first of all, the 3 copies of Herald of the Arclight, just because we play Diviner, and you need to have at least 1 of this card in your extra deck to be able to search. Same thing with the 3 copies of Elder Entity and TSS. You need to have 1 in your extra deck where you're going second, so you can basically make sure that if you don't need the search with your Herald of the Arclight, you can pop a card. We play some rank 8s because the ritual monsters are level 8s, and we do play the Kaijus, so we have 3 copies of Titanic Galaxy to have a spell negation, 3 copies of Dingirsu to have a send, and then you can use these 2 monsters, more of the time is being Dingirsu because you can protect when it attacks, to go into your 1 of 3 copies of Zeus to basically have another win condition in your extra deck. So yep, that's the deck, guys. If you are a fan of Yata-Garasu and you're trying to experiment with a card and basically see exactly what it can do, then I highly recommend playing this deck. Don't expect to see too much success, especially the higher the competitive level you're playing is, but for fun duels and maybe even for locals, this deck can be so hilarious to play against, especially people that don't know what Yata-Garasu does. It's going to be a hell of a time playing a deck like this, because having all these old cards back from the ban list feels so nostalgic, especially when you're a player that used to play back in the day, and being able to play all those cards without erratas feels so nice and so refreshing for the game after such a long time. So yep, that's the deck, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.